The story of a crack Luftwaffe unit, which embarked in August 1940 on the most audacious daylight air raid attempted to that date. But it was their plan to knock out the important RAF maintenance base at Sealand in northeast Wales which led to their downfall. An early Battle of Britain episode thoroughly researched by civil servant Hugh Trivett, whose efforts have brought together the competence of 50 years ago.
I haven't seen you.
Yes.
I have heard you.
Ah, yes, yes, yes.
Coachy,
Now,
I was talking to him. He said, operating the rear gun, he could just see you coming in off to the side. And he couldn't swing his gun around enough to get a good shot at you. He thought, though, that he hit at least one of you. But that was wrong,
yes,
wasn't it?
yes, that was wrong. In fact, none of us were hit.
They weren't expecting fighters. That's what caught them unaware.
What sort of a round trip was it in terms of distance? It must have been a fair...
Almost
fair
1,000
expedition.
miles altogether. You know, by daylight, but of course the return journey was going to be by night. And that was going to be the easy part of the journey. At least that's what they hoped. That didn't materialize. They were shot down.
Hugh Trivett's insatiable interest and meticulous attention to detail have made him a leading authority on the war in the air in both Britain and Germany.
First of all, I go to the Public Records Office in London for the RAF side. Then to the Bundesgeheim, who were very good with me in Germany for the Luftwaffe side. And then I try to obtain details of the actual combats from the Luftwaffe pilots that survive and the RAF pilots that survive. So I don't rely on hearsay.
At the home in Troisdorf, near Cologne in West Germany, of Dr. Heinrich Roeder and his wife Marie, the old adversaries are reunited in a remarkable annual exercise of friendship and reconciliation. The gathering is another brainchild of Hugh Trivett, who uses the event to further his knowledge, for each man has his story to tell. Gustav Ullmann was a ground engineer turned gunner on their plane, a Heinkel 111. Walter Gietz from the same unit was shot down over the English Channel in an accompanying plane, and like the others, spent the rest of the war in captivity. Engineer Walter Schaum was destined to play a specific part in our story after the demise of his plane. Heinz Kirchi was the wireless operator and rear gunner.
Doctor of medicine, but...
Dr. Heinrich Roeder, bomb aimer and navigator, was the youngest member of the crew at 20. Arthur Wiesmann, at 28, was the oldest crew member. A survivor of several campaigns and holder of the Iron Cross, he was recognized as a brilliant pilot and a fearless leader. But like the others, his fate was to be settled suddenly by 3 Spitfire pilots, including 19-year-old Peter Eyerst, already an RAF fighter ace. Today, their friendship is sealed by a strong mutual respect for their past prowess.
So how about you, Gus? What do you do?
I do. My hobby, I must...
Peter Eyerst, I managed to track Peter Eyerst, the only surviving RAF pilot of the 3 that shot down Wiesmann. Proved to be very helpful with the documents he had, and very personable, very personable. Even to this day, he's the epitome of what you would assume was a Battle of Britain pilot. Glamorous, well-spoken. At that time, of course, only 19 years of age and already experiencing combat during the Battle of France.
Men of the caliber of Peter Eyerst were to play their much-celebrated role in the Battle of Britain over the ensuing months. For the time being, the anticipated German onslaught from the air was awaited with a heady mixture of courage and anxiety by a seemingly unprepared Britain. It was known that highly organized bomber squadrons were amassing in northern France, and Britain's defense forces were accordingly poised. On the domestic front, the British people were shoring up their properties with a cheerful stoicism, and it was to be a while before civilians were to become the mass victims of aerial attacks. But there were cruel casualties nevertheless. Although official German policy was to bomb military installations only, some towns had inevitably suffered from the power of the Luftwaffe. It was natural to imagine that each sporadic raid could be the start of something bigger and more fearful. But in fact, the German machine was not quite ready to get into full motion. Their cool, controlled and confident Air Force, who had not even considered the possibility of failure, awaited the command which would snap them into action. And when it came, some of them saw the reality. It must have been a premonition which made the smallest crew member refuse to go. At least one Heinkel went without its mascot.
At Rennes, early in the morning on the 14th of August, the group commander called all the bomber crews together. He told them that this was going to be the big attack, the main attack on Britain, to knock out the Air Force bases and the maintenance bases. They were all given specific targets, some very extremely difficult. Wiesmann, by this time, was Stabelkapitän, and he looked at the targets, and he'd seen that RAF Sealand was virtually almost appeared to be a suicide mission, right across the whole breadth of Wales by daylight. So he didn't allocate it, he took it upon himself, and his crew were very experienced, to go and also to take 2 accompanying fighter bombers, which are very, also elite crews. He thought at least one of them would make it out of the 3. They took off late, very late, the last ones away, the 3 planes. Immediately they come into trouble, come into attack over the English Channel. One was very badly damaged and had turned back for home and crash landed at Rennes. All the crew was survived. But the other one, the Geeks, was badly shot up. They were forced to bail. All 4 of them bailed. One actually went down with the plane. He was very badly shot. They tried to get him out, but his parachute opened and he went down with the plane. The other 4 that bailed out, 2 drowned, but Geeks and Dubrel were picked up by a lifeboat. They flew without fighter cover because there was supposed to be a blanket, a 10-tenths cloud over most of Britain. Unfortunately, it started to clear late in the afternoon when they took off. And over the channel, they experienced great difficulties over the English Channel. Over the Bristol Channel, the clouds settled in again, so they were able to cross the Bristol Channel without being caught by the fighters of 92 Squadron. Over Wales, it was patchy, but they kept their eye they looked out for fighters, which they really thought would come at them again. But once they're halfway across Wales, they just settled down, interdispersed in and out of the cloud, hiding from any fighters that might appear, but none did.
Yet despite the knowledge that this should have been considered as near to a suicide trip as they'd ever been on, there was an overall air of quiet optimism aboard. They had to put from their minds the possible fate of the other 2 planes. And there was also the steely assuredness exuded by Wiesmann, the inscrutable commander at the controls. Was this bearer of the Iron Cross at all apprehensive of further fighter attack?
Der Abenddämmerung, und ich bin ja in geschlossenem Wolkendecke geflogen. Wofür sollte ich da Angst haben?
So,
Ich hatte ja nur die Sorge, die Maschine auf Kurs zu halten.
yeah. So, because it was already getting darker and darker, and he was flying through the clouds, he said, well, there was no point in being afraid. So, he didn't know what to be afraid of.
They eased down from the clouds, and it was a sunny summer evening once more. There in front of them lay their destination, RAF Sealand, a perfect sitting target.
Wolkengrenze.
There are times when a pilot feels more than usually indebted to his navigator. The route had been brilliantly marked out, and Wiesmann gives justifiable praise to his able colleague, Heinrich Roeder, for the masterly way in which cloud cover had been used all along the Welsh border. So far, so good. Now, though, Roeder would have to take up his other function, that of bomb aimer. The intended 3-plane attack would have been massively destructive. Nevertheless, it was up to Roeder to make the best of it, as recounted by Hugh Trivett and Flight Lieutenant Ian Townend of RAF Sealand.
Well, she came in low, really low over here, and the first bomb must have gone down just on the rise as we see it now where the railway runs. The second one, of course, exploded smack bang in front of the guard room. The third one, between the guard room and the sergeant's mess,
Is that the one that severed the power
That's right.
cable?
Took the power cable completely out. I think it put all the lights out in this part, but even though it was only dusk. And then the next bomb, well, that was the one that did the damage. It blew the top off the sergeant's mess, killed 1 sergeant, wounded 6 others, and also injured some people in the main barrack square. The shrapnel went over the top, hitting one of the buildings very badly, and caught a young lad, well, an apprentice about 16 or 17 years of age and hurt him very badly. The next two came in right onto the sick quarters here, one either side, doing a lot of severe damage, but no casualties. The next one right on this bridge here, 2 or 3 people were injured in the guard room, and the next two just harmlessly into the field over there, killing a cow.
You were telling me about the sergeant's mess just now. Our understanding of it was that there was only one actually killed. What do you know about that?
Well, we certainly know a warrant officer was killed, and 6 severely injured. Now, there have been stories that there 1 or 2 other people were killed, and if they were, I think they were actually on the bridge here in the guard room, or the gun post that was here. Certainly not in the sergeant's mess. Right. Only 1 sergeant was dead, and that was the warrant officer, I believe.
Yes, so we understand. That's
right.
all we've heard. But obviously, you've heard the same stories locally.
50 years on, the raid is recalled by 2 former RAF men, Maurice Spollington and John Harty.
That big block over there. Yeah. They've not altered. And, of course, this was a parade ground.
Yeah.
Hallowed ground. Which we were not allowed to walk over.
The lawns weren't quite as well cultivated in those days, were they?
No. I wonder if the air raid shelters are still here. Oh, I love the air raid shelters.
Yeah.
They could be, couldn't they? Still there?
They are. They are the same one, aren't
Yeah. Spent a lot of time down there.
It should come as no surprise that the Home Guard, or the local defence volunteers, had a part in this scenario. Stan Holt Weston was a raw 17-year-old at the time.
I think the government knew at that time that the country was virtually defenceless. And looking back on things, we now know it virtually was. Its army was in a shambles, and we were just not ready for it. They formed the Home Guard on the 11th of May. I joined more or less immediately. Why, I don't know. I think out of a sense of patriotism, possibly. And we used to meet at the drill hall in Grangewood, Weston, Birkenhead, doing our bits of drill in the early days. But we all had an armband, meaning LDV, on the arm. And about June, we then received large canisters of rifles, packed solidly in grease. You couldn't see the rifles with grease, but on the top of the boxes there were Canadian markings, and we were told they were from World War I. So at least we had rifles. So in the evenings during June, we used to unpack these rifles and all the grease, get in a terrible mess, and the smell of it was appalling, until we actually had the rifles clean. Then we were drilling with them. So we were becoming useful, or we knew how to handle weapons. Bear in mind, the unit I was with were composed of men. Well, some of them had acne in their teenage, and others had clicking dentures and stifling limbs at the other end, but they're all patriots, this wild band of men.
I was posted to 5 flying training school across the way, and there was no room somehow. And then they tried to put me in one of these barrack rooms, and there was no room there. So they finally settled me in the empty married quarters at that window you can see in the distance, the white window. And that's where I sat on this summer evening. It was a lovely evening.
Well, that day I was on picket duty in the married patch over yonder.
We were then taken to Sealand Aerodrome to have firing range practice. In other words, we were about to fire 5 rounds of ammunition. We were taken there by coach, and it was the 14th of August, 1940. We arrived, I think, about 7:45, and all this motley band of men formed up in threes. We were told to load up so that we wouldn't waste time when we reached the range, but all had our safety catches on.
And I was actually writing a letter to my wife, and then suddenly I heard this clattering. And I didn't quite know what it was.
The NCO in charge of it was busily having a shave in the usual way, with a towel around his neck, and somebody came in to report a blenny backfiring, and he casually walked over to the door, looked out, and it's Jerry.
This plane was flying quite low. By that time it was over here.
This large aircraft flew over at the height of about maybe 300 yards, about 1,000 feet. It wasn't moving fast, but it was quite visible and slow, with no aggression whatsoever. Everybody looked up, and they saw crosses and a swastika on the back. Somebody says, Jesus It's a German. Well, we all ran like headless chickens in every direction.
And they were machine gunning airmen walking down that road there.
Some shot to the toilet, others went hiding under hedges. I rushed into a door where there was a half-made sandbag wall, wondering what on earth, you know, what was going to happen next. Nobody had expected any daylight raid of anything like this.
And I see a post there with a spigot on the top for mounting a machine gun, and the machine gun was lying at the bottom of it. So I thought it was a good opportunity for me to have a go.
It must have turned round, come back over Shotton Steelworks, and came back over Sealand Aerodrome.
So I popped the gun onto it's a Lewis gun, onto the spigot. Safety catch was already off, so I just had to cock it and fire it, and it fired, so that was great. When I come to bring it to bear, by this time the aircraft was overhead, I couldn't bear it because there was a handle underneath this particular machine gun which was fouling the post. So with this, I had to give up.
It was lower. The details of the aircraft were more defined, and also it was spraying machine gun fire. Well, this was a shock. I was in the doorway there, and I can remember seeing machine gun fire running towards me like the lash of a whip, and it was splattering the concrete as it came. It would have been impossible to get out of the way.
My girlfriend at the time had been standing at the main gate waiting to find where I was, because I'd actually supposed to have met her earlier.
And as we were standing there, plane came over, very low. My father looked up and he said, "Oh, it's a Jerry." Then bang, bang, bang.
So with this, I vanished down the air raid shelter, and it was just about my end of Little Ward at Sealand.
When the thing was about 300 or 400 yards away, I raised the rifle, the Lee Enfield, and fired 3 rounds at it. I couldn't miss it in any way. Reloaded again and fired the 2 other rounds, and it shot over to the back of me and then round, and I think it must have started bombing. But there was such a commotion around where I was at that time that I couldn't really say about it, whether I didn't hear any bombing. I've probably forgotten all about it. When I've mentioned this incident to various people, they've said that this is possibly, although there's no record to this effect, but it's possibly the first aggressive action by Dad's army or the Home Guard against any German in the last war, and it's quite likely because they'd never done a daylight raid before.
The minor defensive activity below didn't seem to register with the bomber crew, whose confidence was growing by the minute.
As they were going away, they decided there was absolutely no resistance on the ground, not even any anti-aircraft fire, not even a machine gun bullet. So around they went again. There was planes parked all along the side. They decided to machine gun the planes, at least inflict as much damage as they could. They lined up, came in for the second run, right below the level of the trees. Machine gunned 11 planes on the ground, destroying about 4 of them and seriously damaged about another 4. And also then they decided to shoot up the airfield, which everybody was running all over the place, and still not a shot from the ground. So up they went, and they were going home, until Kochi said, "Around again, there's nobody there." And these men just reacted to Kochi's shout and went in for a 3rd run. 3 runs over an airfield in daylight. By then, of course, it was too late.
Dr. Heinrich Roeder brings his wife, Mary, on a nostalgic visit to Sealand, and together with the Spitfire pilot, Peter r.s.d., the detailed research continues.
Right, gentlemen, as you can see, we're in this building here on what we call the East Camp, and this side over here was where the airfield was, and in fact, it's a fairly old slide. You can see that the Perry track and some of the dispersal points, and these are actually the original hangars that would have been here at the time of the air attack. And this is where we believe the aircraft will have been actually lined up is just outside the front of here. What we'll do is we'll have a look at the next slide, which shows in a little bit better detail. We believe then the second pass of the aircraft came past onto the airfield side, where the aircraft will have been parked in front of the hangars here and actually strafed through those. And they were coming round this way for a further third pass when the Spitfires will have picked them up some further way out than this.
In fact, just 5 miles away at Harden Airfield stood the only 3 armed Spitfires on alert for the defence of the whole of North Wales. Now a major British aerospace establishment, Harden was a far more primitive place at the beginning of the war.
Shows exactly where we used to be in 1940, and our aircraft were based around this area here, and then further around the corner, where we had tents as our flight huts, and tents as our mess tent, and tents to sleep in. So it was all pretty crude.
But the hangars were here then, Pete?
Yes, these hangars were here, but they were covered in grass and camouflaged at each end, and it was a very good overall camouflage, in fact.
So the Spitfires were parked out all the time in the open?
Oh, yes, always, always.
Just with covers on for the night?
That's right. Yes, one of the reasons, of course, was to have the aircraft dispersed around the perimeter of the airfield so that they did not present one single target. Because if you had a bomb that dropped in your dispersal area and all your aircraft were grouped together, you could lose the lot. Whereas if they were dispersed around the perimeter of the airfield, then you might lose 1 or 2, but you wouldn't lose the lot. And on the particular day concerned, the 14th of August, it was about 8:30 in the evening, 8:45 maybe. We had finished flying for the day, and we had adjourned to our mess tent to go and have a glass of beer, and we just ordered a half pint, and we heard some bombing.
Yes.
From your aircraft.
Sealand.
And yes, so we looked out. Sealand is over there, yes. And we saw your aircraft.
Yes.
So we ran to our 3, or we said to the mechanics, start up 3 aircraft. Took straight off. We didn't bother to taxi into wind. We went off, we turned to port over there and picked you up when you were doing what was possibly your second or maybe third run. Third run, yes, over Sealand.
The Staffelkapitän's brilliance would now be needed to evade such a concentrated barrage.
Both engines was damaged at that time.
Oh, yes.
I said to Wiesemann, the motor is damaged.
Yes.
He said, I know, but he means the left motor and I mean the right motor.
So you were a little confused.
Yes. That was the end of our flight.
Yes. But then you went round in a circle. We went back over the river. You turned...
the pilot think I must find a big area to make a crash landing.
Yes. That's right. So he was looking for a crash, or an area to crash land. And he went over the River Dee at that time, I think, because that was where Syd Lawrence saw us from Shotton.
A superstore now stands on the site of the old Alhambra Theatre, where Syd Lawrence, as a young man, was playing in the band on that night of August the 14th, 1940. The night he saw something which left an indelible image on his memory. Musicians have their own part to play in the war effort, but it was far different from the activity going on above a Shotton side street. It all happened way before this young lady was born.
Just like to show you that.
Good heavens. Where did you get this from?
It's my husband's mother was in the Spitfire Review in the Alhambra when you were there.
The old Alhambra Theatre?
That's right. And Jack Evans.
Jack Evans. Yeah.
Was the person there as well, as you can see.
Yep. Jack Evans, Bell, Austin. Oh, yeah. Where's your name, sir?
There you are.
Oh, there it is.
I'm in the orchestra.
Yeah.
It's got Mr. Syd Lawrence, cornet.
You know, I well remember in those days they had a Spitfire Fund, and they had all sorts of organisations and commercial concerns who were donating money to buying Spitfires. And they reckoned the cost of a Spitfire was about £5,000.
I remember it's a big £5,000, yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
You can't buy a car for that now.
Yes, they were all over the country, weren't they, these, you know, collecting money for Spits.
That's right.
And bombers.
Yes,
I remember, I think
yes.
it's £25,000 for a bomber,
yeah,
and £5,000
like
for a Spit.
That's right, that's right. It's interesting.
Must have helped you a lot.
That's most interesting.
Well, there. Can I have a copy of that?
Yes, certainly,
oh,
yes.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Stood on the top of Salisbury Street here.
Yes.
With my friend.
Well, that would have been about 9 o'clock in the evening, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, well, it had to be because it was still daylight. And we stood talking, but we happened to be looking down Salisbury Street, you know. And suddenly, we couldn't believe our eyes. A German bomber shot right across the bottom, down the river.
Down there?
Yeah. It's a bit obscured now because there are some buildings and sheds and things. But at the back of that, as you would remember,
yes.
the shot and steel works.
Yes, that's right.
So,
yeah.
And we saw this bomber go down, couldn't have been more than 20 feet off the ground. Would that be about right?
Well, that would be about right, because he'd been damaged at that time, and he had to turn back to try and make a forced landing, because he originally thought he was going to get away, but then he found his engines were damaged, and then came back to make this forced landing.
Well, it was quite a sight for us, because we hadn't seen anything like this before. I mean, we'd heard the bombers go over in the dark, but to see one in Shotton in daylight, and it whizzed across the bottom of down the river, closely followed by a Spitfire. Well, I mean, it was like a camera shutter going off in your brain, and it stayed with me ever since.
Well,
and when I saw the photograph of you and the crew of the bomber in the paper last week, I jumped 6 feet in the air, you know. I said, I saw that.
The 3 Spitfires, piloted by Hallingspot, Maclean and Ayerst, scored several direct hits. And though they knew the Germans were doomed, they still clung tightly to their quarry. With the Heinkel rapidly losing altitude, the search was on for a suitable place to bring the plane down. He would be spoilt for choice in the flatlands of the Dee estuary, but nevertheless, the matter would concentrate the mind of the Staffelkapitän.
Gefühle hat man, glaube ich, in solchem Augenblick nicht. Da denkt man nur daran, wie bringst du den Vogel jetzt noch heil runter.
You don't have really any feelings at all then, but you only think, what can I do? How can I land my plane successfully?
They found themselves on the outskirts of Chester. Even then, they managed to joke that it would benefit them to land on the possibly neutral Welsh side of the border. Leesman set his eye on a large field and shut down the remaining spluttering engine, and they all girded themselves for a wheels-up belly land. Clipping a high hedge and ducking under some telegraph wires, the long journey terminated 40 yards from Border House Farm.
The farmhouse was occupied by 2 families, the Llewellyn Joneses and the Andertons. And they had 2 young daughters, virtually the same age. They were cousins, of course. And they were playing outside in the grounds, very nice house at the time. And they could see this plane, this bomber coming down, a flame. And they ran into the house. They said their parents, there's a bomber coming down into our fields, a bomber coming down.
Out again. It is. Into the house again, because our parents were sitting round the kitchen table, listening to the news on the radio, and there must have been some, I think, important news. You wouldn't believe us. Yeah. Out again. The smoke coming from the engine. It's a German plane. In again. Out they came. My God, it is. Kathy, to you, Dad said, didn't he? Go and get the bandage box. Get the rabbit. Go and get the bandage box. Get the first aid box. and we did that, and Kathy coming down the stairs, you dropped the bandages, and they cascaded, and we picked them up, ran out, and the plane was coming then, under the wire.
And our fathers were through the gate here, and just walking towards the plane. They hadn't got the gun then.
We ran out, gave them the gun. And
well, with the first aid kit and the gun, they were going to give you a good reception, weren't they?
Yeah, except we hadn't got any bullets or cartridges in the gun.
The Germans immediately got out of the plane. And the two young daughters, of course, had never seen fighter pilots, bomber pilots, much more impressive with their big green-grey uniforms and badges and Iron Cross, completely overawed.
Then we saw 5 men, 5 to us, very big men, with our fathers. Our fathers with a gun.
With a gun, hands up.
Yeah. You walked just round here, and you stood under that tree, your hands, and your brown leather helmets.
And all of a sudden, the plane ignited behind them. Huge pyrotechnics, bombs exploding. Not so much the bombs, but the incendiaries were going off, and certainly the unexpended machine gun bullets. One of the crew, of course, had crept on the blind side and fired the plane.
It took flight engineer Walter Schaum only seconds to do his destructive duty, and in moments the Heinkel was aflame.
And then it was whoosh, and bang, 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 because all the bullets were going off in the plane. And we were concerned.
The Mechaniker has dropped and bombed in the fuel tank. And then it's a blow-up.
Well, and you see, we didn't know whether or not you got any bombs on board.
No.
We were all going to go up.
The bombs are in Sealand.
Yes. Policeman's last order was, fire the plane, do not let it fall into enemy hands.
His beloved Heinkel now burning to a shell, it was a somewhat demoralized Flugführer who entered the farmhouse.
Ja, es waren etwas gemischte Gefühle, sagen wir mal.
There were somewhat mixed feelings that I had.
We were practicing our schoolgirl French when we were on the laddie. We thought, well, we can communicate that way with some sign language. I got my school Mac on, and in my pocket was some Roundtree's pastels, a tube of Roundtree's pastels. And I gave him, offered him the tube.
Wireless operator.
Yes, he took these pastels and then went through his uniform, pulled out a round tin, a deep round tin, with his iron rations in, and that was a block, a round tablet of chocolate.
The iron ration, Coca-Cola.
Coca-Cola.
Chocolate with cola.
Sounds like Coca-Cola, yeah.
Of the crew, only Ullman was wounded. I think Roda actually had a small cut in his finger, but Ullman, being the rear gunner, the side gunner, was wounded. He had, at one time, it was commonly believed it was a bullet, but we think perhaps now it was shrapnel.
Ich brauchte keine Hilfe, rauszukommen. Ich bin auch aus dem Funkerring ausgestiegen noch, denn ich hatte gar nicht richtig...
The injury to Gustav Ullmann didn't trouble him at first. He easily extricated himself from his gun turret and realized the extent of his wound only when he arrived at the house where the 2 little girls were.
Kleinen Mädchen dort war, bei den beiden. Dort hatte ich Schmerzen an den Beinen.
After the aircraft had crashed, how long was it before the police or the army or Air Force military personnel came along to see you?
I suppose about a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes or more, wasn't it? And then they came by...
I think civilians were here first. They came across the river. And there were wires across the river. I didn't know what for. Oh. And they sort of came across those. They arrived first.
So which service,
and
in fact?
The police.
Which military service?
The police,
the army.
The police and the army?
That's right. And then the fire brigade,
yes.
The ambulance service, the Air Force, the air raid wardens, I think everybody in Chester. The house was completely overwhelmed. The police, I think, were interrogating the pilot.
Yes.
Because I remember poking my nose in the... We did
round the door.
We poked our noses round the dining room door, and there was this pilot who, to me, had a long, sombre face in his uniform. And there was a man very seriously leaning over him, and he was sitting in a chair, and there was another man. And they looked up, and we went, and we said we'd beat a hasty retreat.
For weeks afterwards, the strongly guarded wreck of the Heinkel would attract attention from all around. The remains of the machine were subjected to the scrutiny of various authorities, and the families at Border House Farm soon discovered that it was a mixed blessing to have the hulk of an enemy bomber lying around. a tranquil place had been turned into a focal point for sightseers. Taking full advantage, the farm girls collected money in a tin box from the steady stream of visitors for the Spitfire Fund. The envy of their school friends, Kathy and Wendy, revelled in their newly found celebrity status.